Today I'm returning from a trip to the place where I collect my water. I go to a spring nearly every day, and today I just had the most outrageous encounter on the way. I met a man who was clearly still recovering from what seemed like all over burns, almost head to toe, serious burns. And it turns out that he also likes to spend time at this spring where I go to collect my water, except he had never actually made it all the way around this kind of swamp to the spring itself and knew nothing about the spring or its story. And I just had this impulse to say to him, look, come round. And I showed him that there were clear paths so you could get round, and then told him the story of the spring, which is another whole story. The discovery of it from a man who was recovering from a suicide attempt. And I sat quietly with this man for a long time. I said I go to this spring to connect with nature and to listen to the sound of the spring and the wind in the trees. I really had this feeling that maybe few people really had been able to hear his story. I mean, this guy is recovering from major burns. And, I didn't want to ask him so that he had to answer. I got the impression that maybe just sitting quietly with this guy in the woods would be an act of brotherhood and acceptance and, just to not focus on his injuries. And it's always an interesting one, meeting someone and going, do they, is it better to ask or not ask? Because sometimes it can be extremely painful to have to relive something, and if somebody's not really ready to listen or really understand or really go through the journey with you, then that can just be even more annoying than not being asked. And so I spent some time there by the spring with him in silence. He had no idea how utterly beautiful this place was, and when I told him the story of how it was discovered and this other brother who was recovering from a suicide attempt, it kind of I could see that he was really drinking in the place in a way that he hadn't done previously. And I filled up one of my bottles and gave it to him. I mean, it was really clear to me that he had had a close encounter with fire. He had been burnt by the fire of life. And I got the impression that drinking from that spring would be a cooling tonic for him, and he absolutely loved it. I shared my bottle with him, and I think he also took that as a great act of acceptance and kinship. And I took some time off in the sun on my own, and then I was having to wait a long time for the spring to clear because I did a little bit of clearing and it stirred up all the waters, and so I had time. I wasn't in a rush today, and so I sat next to him and I said, brother, if you want to tell me your story, I don't want you to feel that you have to, but I'm also here to listen, and if you want to share it. So he told me his story, which began many years ago when he was beaten up by police in a cell, when he had been picked up in the street in London, where they accused him or thought of him as potentially being a drug dealer. He wasn't. He was never caught with anything. They suspected him of having arms. He didn't have any weapons on him, and he eventually got beaten up by 6 police officers in a cell. The whole thing was recorded, and he eventually went to court and won, though he didn't receive any compensation and had spent the last 20 years wearing a catheter as a result of that incident in the police cell. Now, I don't know enough about this guy's life to be able to judge the story in any shape or form, but that seemed to be the beginning of a very dark period of his life. And he told me just absolutely awful details of what's happened to him since then, and it was a very powerful thing to sit and witness and listen to. It's just incredible what humans are able to surmount and to cope with. I relayed to him stories of other people that I know who are coming back from suicide attempts and from profound, life-changing accidents, and not because I was wanting to one-up him or anything, but I got the impression that sometimes when we're going through a really profound challenge, it's good to know that we're not alone and that there are others whose suffering may yet even outstrip our own, to give us back that feeling of, wow, I'm lucky to be where I am. It turned out that these burns were actually self-inflicted, that he had set himself alight. It's just so incomprehensible to think that someone could be so hurting that they would douse themselves in petrol and try to set themselves alight. And this is, of course, not like the way that the Tibetan monks or Indian visionaries have done as an act of protest. As self-immolation is a practice that has been used in the East as a way of people bringing attention to issues. And it was a really profound moment that we shared by the spring today. I feel really moved by it. It seems to speak to so many things about the fragility of life, about the degree of human suffering that we can experience on this planet. It reminded me, and I felt moved to share with him, my own experiences of having my life flash before my eyes and the life review that takes place as we leave this earthly realm. The reconfiguring that we go through as we try to understand how we confronted the challenges of being alive. I haven't been using my voice enough. I know that I have much more to share than I have been. I'm now in my 50s. There are people that say that I have entered now the autumn of my life, the period of life when a fruit tree gives over its branches laden with the fruits that have been cultivated through the course of that lifetime. And I don't feel like I've been sharing what I have to share enough. And this afternoon, the moment that I shared with this man was a strangely beautiful thing, because it's such a rare occasion that we get to really give someone our ear. It's funny because to clean the spring, I stirred up the spring and had to wait a long time for it to settle and for the water to come through clear, and it gave that moment, an unusual moment there, for me to be able to really take time and be with someone in their pain, in their suffering, and to share a little glimmer of a light, some kind of perspective that might help to make sense of what he's going through. I've been going through all my own stuff. It doesn't mean because we've had certain insights that we're then impervious to the suffering of the world. Of course not. One of the noble truths was life is suffering. It goes along with the experience of being here. And we're not in a suffering competition. We all have our own relative forms of suffering, and they all are painful to us individually. They say we should walk a mile in each other's shoes to really understand that we have each our own particular brand of suffering. And it's not that one is more or less than the other. They're unique to us and to our soul path, what it is that we've come here, what we've chosen to come here to learn. This school of life, which apparently amongst the many schools of life that are out there, is one of the hardest, where it's very easy to forget the fact that we are dreaming this existence into being, that we're co-creating this experience, and that we have chosen certain events to happen in order that we may grow as the souls that we are. You know, it occurs to me that some people may find this trite and superstitious and ridiculous even. Then this message is not for them. This message is for those people that need a reminder that this life is a magical thing and brings us what it is that we need, and that we will encounter a moment where we look back on this lifetime and ask ourselves what we drew from it, what we managed to create. Recently I watched again an incredible film that I had forgotten, Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, which is a really profound film and one of those journeys of suffering that, a bit like the Lord of the Rings, can really remind us just how brutal life can be. Even if they're stories, even if they're fantasies, they speak of the trials of human lives that have been lived, and it's helped me to remember that I have to speak up and use my voice, that there is compared to the brutality that we have suffered collectively over thousands of years, it is fear itself that holds us back from fully embodying the people that we can really be. And I'm not immune to that fear. It's been stalling me and preventing me from really standing up and speaking out. So you can expect to see more of me if you're interested, if you wish to follow. What a crazy, crazy world we live in. And God give us the strength to endure our hardships and learn what we can whilst we are here and whilst we are alive. We still have these fingers, these toes, these eyes, these ears. We still have these bodies. There is still breath moving in and out. And there is still the wind in the trees and the light, the sound of the sea. Even with all the trials and tribulations that we go through, there is still so much to be grateful for. In my work as a celebrant, I stand at people's graves and give thanks for them, for their experience, for this experience that life brings us. Making sense of death, making sense of why it is that we choose to come here. I know that to people who have never had a spiritual experience, that it must seem like crazy talk. But if you know, you know. And if you don't know, then maybe this is part of your remembering. If you don't know, then maybe you're watching this still because it speaks to something that you'd forgotten and feels familiar. And in which case we are almost undoubtedly brothers and sisters on this adventure that we call life. So here's to the next time.